Okay, John. Where's this played out of?
So this is a private game in New York.
Like Manhattan or what?
Yeah, Manhattan.
So private
Um,
game in New. Do you live in Manhattan? Just curious.
nah, just moving through.
Oh, okay. Because I always sort of wonder. We've had some people call like about New York private games, and I'm like, well, are there like private games in every borough, like Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten? I truly don't know. I mean, you hear the days of like the Mayfair, but if you're not from there, maybe you don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's
Okay.
a friend of mine knows the guy who runs the game.
Okay. All right. What's the size of the game?
So it's a 10-20,
10-20. And effective stacks?
roughly 2K.
Okay. So 10-20, 2K, private game. Okay.
All right, shall I
Yep.
jump
Yeah,
straight into the
jump
hands?
right into it. Yep, you got it.
Okay, so I think it was about seven-handed. The hand occurred around 3 or 4 a.m. and the villain had just sat down, so I didn't really have any reads on him. We'd just done a round of pot folds, and this was the first, so we got into hold'em
Okay.
with him.
Okay.
So I pick up black kings in UTG. I make it $60.
So
Go
you
ahead.
pick up black kings,
Yeah, black kings, king of clubs, king of spades.
and then $60 is about the average open size here so far.
Yeah, it's the standard open. A lot of people limp as well.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, that's nice. A lot of people limp. You're probably dealing in a high rake setup too, like a private game.
yeah, it's very high.
Yeah.
It's a $100 cap.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah.
It's still worth it though. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
quite sickening.
All right. So you pick up kings, you go to 60. Okay.
Yeah, and then 4 people call, including the villain in the big blind. So we go 5 ways.
So like maybe 2 people and then the blinds call, like 2 people in position on you and then the blinds maybe.
I can't remember if there were 2 or 3 people in position.
Okay.
They won't matter because they were
I'm just
sold out
gonna
on the
that's fine.
flop.
I'm just gonna put two. Usually this setup ends up being like 2 in the field, small and big blind call. It doesn't matter because it's gonna be the same type of pot size. So we're looking at about $240. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so we have $300 in the flop, right?
Oh, 300
Five
bucks.
times
Excuse me.
six.
Right, because it's 5-handed with you. Okay. Yep.
Yep. And the flop is 10, 8, 3, 2 clubs, and it's 10 of clubs, 3 of clubs.
10 of clubs. I'm gonna put 8 of hearts, 3 of clubs. Okay. So front door flush draw. You've got kings with the king of clubs. Any type of private game where you just gave me this setup of like a lot of people limp, obviously it's going to be a crazy good game. And in the way that I would approach like, certain situations would just look at this as like a really good, like kind of lower stakes casino game, like a good 2-5 or a good 1-3. The reason why I bring that up is because one of our CLP small stakes exploits is that you should be doing more betting a larger volume of sort of value hands on more clumps of textured sort of boards, meaning like there are certain boards that are better than like for the people that call like in the field, and the theory says especially multiway you're supposed to be doing a lot of checking, whereas I say like in a lot of these live games like I'm just not doing that. I'm just betting a lot for value, and the best setup you can possibly have is when you don't get raised unless you're beat. You know what I mean? Like people
That's
just
a great
aren't
setup, yeah.
they're not attacking board textures. So the only time that you're getting raised is when they have 2 pair plus, right? Or maybe some monstrous draw. So
Yeah, it's pretty typical. Most
Yeah.
players tend to play passively with value and
so
bluffs.
so when
they
you have
raise,
so if we just take a step back for all you guys who are beginners, like when you have a setup like that, when only better raises and worse calls in the form of draws, you could do a lot of betting on even like 7, 8, 9, 2 hearts with black kings against 4 people. Sounds crazy, right? But that would be the play because you're just continuing to get value and equity protection. And it's not like you're getting blown off your hand, the best hand ever. So that's my approach. Anyways, of course, this board really, I mean, it's kind of in the middle, right? There's maybe 1 or 2 sort of 2 pair combos and you can get some combo draws, but I would still be doing a fair amount of betting here personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think if it was heads up, I'd probably go for the check raise.
Check raise, interesting.
5 ways, I'm definitely preferring a bet.
Now you don't have to go huge. I mean, and this is another thing that you can sometimes struggle with here too. We talk about multi-way theory, where I say multi-way, like you're supposed to be betting kind of on the smaller side multi-way because your opponents are supposed to call down a lot tighter. Like
Yeah,
if
and
you
there's a
bet,
higher chance.
right? If you bet the guy whoever is to your left, really, like if you bet like more than say like 35% of the pot, the guy who's right to your left with like three people to act behind him, he really is only supposed to continue with a 10 or some sort of draw, right? At best. And you could even make a case where like some top pairs are folds if he doesn't have some backdoors. But again, if you kind of flip this into a setup where people just never fold top pair, then you could probably go larger, to be honest with you. So
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
no.
In any case, without going too deep into c-bet size strategies,
Yeah.
because it won't matter here, the big blind donked 1/3.
Wow.
Bet $100 into
Okay.
300.
So
And
he
I'm
bets
next to act.
That's 100. All right, then you're saying you're next to act. So I will put this three call. I'm gonna put this as three calls in the field then, just because it makes.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Now that
Yeah.
I mentioned it, it was 3 calls in the field because
Yeah,
he donked first. To
So
act.
so the big blind donks for 100 into 300, and you have
Yep.
three people left to act behind you, right, in the field.
Yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. I mean, it's not something that happens all that much nowadays. It used to happen a lot more. I remember in No Limit, it used to happen a lot more. What do you think the donking range is here of the big blind?
Well, it's hard to range him exactly, but
I mean, give me a
We can
range.
say roughly. He could have flush draws. He could have Jack 9, 9, 7. He could have a weak 10, or even a strong 10.
Maybe some 10-8, maybe some 10-8 or something. Or those
Yeah, potentially 2 pairs in sets. But I tend to believe he wouldn't donk a third with 2 pair sets because it
Right.
doesn't need as much
And
protection.
right. And I think I tend to agree with you here. I think the range here is going to be maybe some nut flush draws, some combo draws, maybe. And maybe once in a while some 10x. The board is high enough here where you'll sometimes see this on a lower board. You'll see guys donk out with lower overpairs. I'm going to make the assumption that, I mean, I guess once in a while he could have jacks, but there's a lot of people in there. He's probably going to squeeze. I don't know anything about this guy, but if the board was like, say, like 8-6-3 or like 7-6 deuce, you might have a guy in there with eights that donks out. But I think that you are on to the right type of range. Now, the interesting part of this, though, is this hand is a lot different if you were just heads up. You've got three guys behind you. And again, I'm going to give you my sort of suggestion against weaker competition and then against stronger competition. So going back to what I said about weaker competition, where usually only better is going to raise you and sort of draws and weaker are going to call. If you have that set up with the guys behind you, then I think you can easily say that probably the most positive EV play here is to raise the flop because, it's sort of equity protection / value. You don't want a whole lot of like lingering people getting like, say, 4 and 5 to 1 behind you. There's a lot of bad turn cards for you. Now, if you were against somehow really strong competition, now you wouldn't normally get a setup like this where there's going to be like 5 people in the hand. You can open yourself up because if you raise the flop and somebody knows what they're doing behind you, they can put you, especially if you're a deeper stack, they can really, really give you fits because if they put in a 3-bet, especially if they like block a 10 or something like that, it's just like one of these things where they can put so much pressure on you. It's going to be really hard to get to showdown with just one pair. But if you're playing against straightforward people, I have no issue raising.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. I think versus good opponents, in general, I do a lot more flatting here.
Yeah.
That being said, I think kings are strong enough to probably get it in on the flop. If he has 2 pair of set, it's a bit of a cooler.
I don't know. I mean, flipping back to what we just said, though, I got to tell you, if he goes 100 and you go to like 350 and then he like jams for say like 2,000 or something, you'd have to do the pot odds out and really sort of say like, well, is this 3-bet line always a draw? Because even if you throw in some partials of 2 pair and sets and then like the 15 out combo draws, you might not have the equity to call. I got to be honest with you. But I mean, it really depends on what a 3-bet means. Usually you don't get 3-bet all that much. So I wouldn't even worry about it all that much. But
sure.
So
in any case, in this passive lineup with 3 fish essentially behind me, I'm definitely raising because I don't want them all to call behind me and I have no visibility on turns.
Yeah. So would you raise?
Yeah, as you said, a bit of denial, a bit of equity. So I'm going to raise a lot here with my range. So I go for a smallish sizing. I make it 275.
A lot with your range, you mean? But you're not going to do this with like ace, king of hearts or something, right?
No, not that wide. But I would raise, some good tens, jacks plus, some draws.
Okay. All right, so you go to 275, so kind of on the smaller side. And I think that
Yep.
what that does is, the only thing I will say is that if they're fish, somebody might call with a 10 behind you, which is fine. It just can get
Yeah.
if someone flat calls behind you, then you're like, what's that guy's range? Well,
That
it's going to
could
be a
get weird.
10
Yeah,
or
I
a
agree,
draw.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So, okay, so you go to 275.
And it folds back to the big blind who calls,
Okay,
so we're heads up.
that's great. So fold.
Yeah, that's what we wanted,
Yeah, that
essentially.
is exactly what you want, and you want the call. And I will say, for the most part, well, here's the thing about. So by the way, so now the pot is 850. People usually, sort of soft players, usually play somewhat. They fall somewhat into patterns. If for some reason a guy, and it's not typical, is the type of player that will sometimes lead out with strong hands, like say 10-8, set of 3, set of 8s, you're going to see a bet 3-bet here probably more often than just a call, even heads up, because of the wetness of the board. So when he bets and then calls, I think you've got the best hand right now. Okay.
I agree,
Yeah.
So the turn's a brick. It's an offsuit deuce.
Before we move on to the turn, I do want to announce that, again, I am giving away free pieces of myself to Hustler Casino Live's Thirsty Thursday. I'm actually going out there in a few days on October 12th. Last time I won over $22,000 and I gave away $2,200. So you don't want to miss out. You can go to CLPGiveaway.com to get in for free and get those entries in. All right, I'll put it as deuce of spades, okay?
And so there's $850 in the pot.
Yep.
And I bet 500.
So he checks, right?
He checks, I bet 500.
Hero bets 500. So you're betting 500. So if he calls, the pot will be 1850, and you guys will have about maybe 1100-ish left. Because I mean,
I'll have about 1300 left.
You'll have about 1300 left. One of the other things I was thinking about here is that. So I think if you have 1300 left, I actually probably bet larger here for two reasons.
I agree.
I mean, you're going to still get called by the draws, and I don't think that there's going to be a difference between 500 and say 650 if the guy has a 10, because there's two things that, like I said, we're arranging this guy on. He either has a draw and he misses and you don't get value at the end, or he has a 10 and you get lucky on a run out here where if you have gone 650 and the pot's now 2150 and you guys only have 1,000 to 1,100 left, he might call all in with a 10. You know what I mean? Like you get a deuce X run out or something like that,
Yeah, sure. That's what we hope for.
Yeah. So you go 500. He calls again.
So the issue I had is I actually had a little bit more behind than I thought. I had a few piles of $5 chips, and I had about 1,200-1,300 behind after the bet. But I thought I would have maybe 1,100. So that's kind of
that's why you went 500. Okay, so you were trying to set that up. You were trying to set up like that half pot, but you had a little bit.
Yeah,
more.
I didn't size it too well. That's my mistake. I was a bit tired by then.
I mean, that happens in live poker. That's why I actually find these spots easier, especially in tournaments where everything is so sizing dependent. Online poker is easier because everything's right in front of you, right? You don't have to,
I agree. Yeah,
you don't have to eye the guy's stack. All this other bullshit. All right, so 1850 to the river.
Yeah, and I could have, I guess, counted out my chip stack, but I consciously decided not to do that because I didn't want to
anything.
Give him a signal. Yeah, if I'm counting my whole stack and then I bet half of it, he might find a tight fold. I don't know.
So river.
I bet 500 and he calls.
Now we know he doesn't have a set, right, or two pair, because we would just be check jamming all day long.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
Yep.
So the river is an offsuit 7.
All right, so 7 of hearts, river. So the board is 10-8, 3, deuce 7. Obviously, the glaring thing here that maybe you now losing to is Jack 9, right? I mean, that's what comes in on the open-ended side. Okay.
Yeah. And he donk jams 1,300 into 1,850, roughly.
Well, I mean, again, we've been sort of setting this one up where this is the type of guy that's calling with draws and really, only sort of putting pressure on you with better. There's a couple of other, so there's that kind of makes me want to fold. Obviously, busted clubs, you think about that, right? He could be jamming, trying to rep busted clubs. The other problems that I have here, and I believe this is another small stakes exploit, is that for the most part, against these types of villains that we want to play against, which are losing players, they don't do a whole lot of turning hands into bluffs. So the reason why that's important is I don't think he's going to just donk jam 10x, right? Number one, but when you look at some of the other draws out here that might have been like open-ended, like 7-9, now pairs up. So it's just, I mean, obviously, again, I'll stress, front door clubs have busted out. That's the glaring thing. I don't know, because you've shown another thing is you've shown a lot of strength here, John, right? By raising flop and betting 500 on turn. This guy would have to be like almost like a maniacal donk to expect that you are going to fold, that he's going to be able to get a bluff through a fair amount of the time. By the way, there are some other hands here that you're losing to. Like say he had 10-7 and was getting stubborn, or he was just a station and led with 8-7. I think that's less likely, but 10-7 here is another one. And then do we have anything on the, did anything come through with other straights here? So 9-6 of clubs, right? Which is a combo draw. So you're losing to 9-6, you're losing to Jack-9, and you're somehow losing to like 10-7. I don't see anything else here that sort of, there's no other weird ones, and there was no backdoor that came through that he would call. So those are the hands. Yeah, those are the hands you're losing to. I honestly, again, like it's hard for me to say in a vacuum, but I think for those reasons, this is kind of an underbluff spot. You've shown a lot of strength. It's a lot different than if you just went call, or like he bet you called. Like say you were just heads up, there weren't people behind you, right? And let's say change this hand. He bets, you call. Turn, he checks, you bet, he calls. Now river, he donks. Like you don't have to have anything in that spot. That setup that I just gave you here, you're raising with the field behind you on the flop. You're betting the turn. So you've shown a lot of strength. Like you're usually going to have like over pairs and stuff here. So it kind of makes me want to fold, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I do see that. And in general, I agree with you that people don't turn showdown value into bluffs.
Oh, another hand. Okay, so 7-8. That was the other one I was looking for. Thank you, Mad Mardigan 21. 7-8 of clubs. There we go. There's another hand you lose to too. 9-6 of clubs, any Jack 9, 10-7, and 7-8 of clubs.
Sure. So 18 combos of value, and we're getting like 2.5 to 1.
Is that with 7-8 of clubs? 18 combos of value.
Yeah. So 16 Jack 9, and then 9-6, 7-8.
If you're giving them all, so if you have, so if you're getting 2.5 to 1, right, and there's 18 combos of value, then you need to find what, like 7.5 or 7.5 or more bluffs, right? That's about right.
Yeah.
7.5.
Then he'd be over bluffing. Yeah.
Right. But you've got the king of clubs too, which is actually now bad for you at the end, right?
Yeah, it does remove
some clubs.
Combos.
Yeah. I mean, those really wouldn't be combo draws unless it was like king 8 of clubs, but again,
so I want to give you at this stage some information on the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually runs private games.
Mm-hmm.
He's a friend of the guy who runs this game, and he bought in for much deeper than everyone at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Like the average stack was about 2K, and he bought in for 5.
Okay.
Yeah, and just he's maybe a 30-year-old Asian guy, quite active.
Oh fuck! I call.
My read is that he's potentially just gambling, you know.
Did you say he's the one that's running this game?
He runs his own games. He's a friend of the guy who runs this game.
Because
this is not his game.
That's another little dynamic that can sometimes come into play, who the game runner is, because this is something for casino players never have to think about. Sometimes the game runner wants to juice the game up, get money on the table so he can rake more, because it doesn't matter if he makes a slightly EV less than EV play if he gets more money on the table. If the game runs a few more hours, it might actually, be long-term positive for him overall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I that makes it closer then. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, we've been going back and forth. Like, what would a passive loose? I would fold to a passive loose fish.
Yeah, I was leaning for fold versus an unknown typical passive fish. You know, if this was in the casino $2-5 game, I would fold like 90%, if not 100. Sounds
to me like you called.
So I did hesitate for a long time, and then I ended up deciding to just flip a coin mentally.
Okay.
And I drew the king of clubs, so I called.
And
of course, I run into Jack 9.
Jack 9 off? No clubs?
Jack 9 off.
Yeah, just pure Jack 9 off. Now, the other interesting thing about this, though, too, from your opponent's perspective is I don't mind another small stakes exploit, which is bluffing flush draws that come in with straight draws. So this guy's got a perfect candidate where you're thinking in your head, I don't want a club, I don't want a club. He actually has Jack 9. And if he knew what he was doing, he needs to make this play on a club too, right? Like if he makes this play on a club, do you fold? I would think you'd have to, right?
He told me after the hand he was planning on donk jamming a club.
I mean, you can't really. The way
I was calling on a club as well.
You were going to call on a club, really?
I was going to call possibly more on a club. I don't know.
Wow. I mean, then you just have to squarely give him like Jack 9 if we're saying that he's not going to turn 7-9 into a bluff. Well, 7, like it depends on what the club would be, right? Like if we're saying.
I just think he's the type of player who could try to buy the pot on a club, whereas here I felt it was a lot closer.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
But as you said in the lead up to the river, which I agreed with, I don't think he has 2 pair of set ever in this line.
Mm-hmm.
So with this river, it's just Jack 9 or a bluff.
Right. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. That's a good one.